Welcome back to Inside Vietnam. I'm your host, and today's story is one that's going to stick with you. Meet Declan O'Sullivan. He's 67 years old, a retired history teacher from Cork, Ireland. Spent 40 years teaching teenagers about the Easter Rising and the Troubles, living a comfortable, predictable life. Then, his wife of 38 years passed away, and the comfortable became unbearable. 3 years of rattling around an empty house, his grown children busy with their own lives across the water, grief settling into his bones like the cork rain. So Declan did what a lot of men his age are doing these days. He got on a plane to Vietnam, chasing what the YouTube algorithm promised him: affordable living, beautiful weather, a chance to start over. What he found was all that and more. Much more. This is a story about loneliness, hope, and what happens when you're so desperate to feel purposeful again that you stop asking the right questions. What happened next changed everything. This one's complicated, and I think you'll find it hits different than the usual cautionary tales. Here's Declan's story, in his own words, right? So, where to begin? I suppose with Margaret, because everything begins and ends there, doesn't it? We met at University College Cork in 1978. I was studying history, she was doing English literature. Married in 1982, had Siobhan 2 years later, Eowyn 3 years after that. I took a position at St. Finbarr's secondary teaching history, and that was my life for 40 years. The same classrooms, the same textbooks with updates every decade or so, teaching Cork teenagers about the famine and the Civil War, and trying to make dead revolutionaries feel relevant to kids checking their phones under their desks. It was a good life. I'm not complaining. Predictable, safe, the kind of existence that doesn't make for interesting dinner conversation, but makes for a solid foundation. Margaret taught primary school until the kids came, then went part-time, then retired early to care for her mother. We had our routines. Saturday morning walks along the Lee, Sunday Mass, summers in West Cork. Our children grew up, moved away. Siobhan to London for finance work, Eowyn to Dublin doing something with computers I never quite understood. That's the natural order of things, isn't it? You raise them to leave. Then Margaret got sick. Pancreatic cancer. They gave her 6 months, and she made it 5.5, which the doctor said was good going, as if there's such a thing as good going when you're watching your wife of 38 years disappear in increments. She died 3 years ago, this past April. I remember the nurse saying she went peacefully, and I wanted to ask what that meant exactly, because she'd fought like hell right up until she couldn't anymore. The house became impossible after that. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand where she'd left them. Her gardening boots by the back door, still caked with mud from the last time she'd been well enough to tend her roses. I couldn't move anything, couldn't throw anything away. The rooms filled up with her absence until I felt like I was drowning in it. Siobhan and Eowyn did their best. Weekly phone calls, visits when they could manage, suggestions about grief counseling and senior activity groups that made me feel ancient and pathetic. They meant well, but they had their own lives, their own problems. Siobhan was going through some trouble with her partner. Eowyn had just had his second child. They didn't need their 67-year-old father falling apart on them. I tried the things you're supposed to try. Joined a walking group that met twice weekly along the marina. Attended Mass more regularly. Volunteered at the local library, reshelving books on Wednesday afternoons. Nothing took. I'd come home to that silent house and feel the walls pressing in. That's when the YouTube started. Insomnia, you see. I'd be up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., watching whatever the algorithm fed me. Started with historical documentaries, which made sense given my background. Then it shifted. British pensioners in Thailand showing their monthly budgets. Australians in the Philippines talking about beachfront living on 800 quid a month. Americans scattered throughout Southeast Asia, all of them saying the same thing. Life is better here, cheaper here, you can start over here. Then I found the Vietnam channels. Da Nang beaches, Hanoi's old quarter. Testimonials from men my age, some older, living well on their pensions. The cost of living breakdowns were extraordinary. A nice apartment for 400 euros monthly. Meals for 2 or 3 euros. Healthcare at a fraction of Irish prices. But it was more than the economics. These men seemed happy. Purposeful. They'd found communities. Learned a new language. Some had even found partners. The Vietnam I'd taught about for 40 years was helicopters and Agent Orange in the fall of Saigon. Images from Ken Burns documentaries. Black and white footage of chaos and war. This was something different entirely. Cafe culture, motorbikes, friendly locals, safety. A place where a retired history teacher's pension would stretch. where the weather was warm year-round, where maybe, just maybe, a man could feel like something other than a ghost haunting his own life. I had my teacher's pension. 40 years in the classroom earned me about €7,000 monthly, which is comfortable enough in Ireland but hardly luxurious. And I'd sold Margaret's car after she died, downsized belongings, accumulated about €15,000 in savings. I sat with those numbers for weeks, doing calculations, watching more videos, reading expat forums. When I told Siobhan I was thinking about Vietnam for an extended stay, maybe 6 months, her voice got very careful, the way it does when she's worried but doesn't want to show it. "Are you running away, Da?" she asked. And I said something about how our ancestors got on coffin ships to America with less money and worse prospects, so perhaps I was entitled to a bit of geographical adventure in my retirement. She didn't laugh. Ewan was more supportive, or maybe just less inclined, to argue. Said a change of scenery might do me good, but to keep in touch, send photos, don't do anything rash. I promised I wouldn't. 6 months later, March of last year, I booked a one-way ticket to Da Nang. Didn't sell the house, just locked it up. Arranged for a neighbor to check on it monthly. Packed 2 suitcases with summer clothes and books I'd been meaning to read. Sat on the plane thinking about all the history I'd taught about people leaving Ireland, and here I was at 67, joining that long tradition of Irish emigration, even if only temporarily. When the wheels touched down in Da Nang, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Not quite hope, that's too strong a word, but possibility, maybe. The sense that the next chapter hadn't been written yet, that there might actually be a next chapter at all. One had no idea what I was walking into. None at all. Da Nang in late March is a different planet from Cork. I stepped out of the airport into heat that felt like walking into a wall, humidity pressing against my skin, the smell of exhaust and something floral I couldn't identify. A Grab driver I'd arranged through the app was holding a sign with my name spelled wrong, which seemed appropriate somehow. New beginnings, new mistakes. He drove me to a serviced apartment I'd booked online, near my K beach. The journey was chaos. Motorbikes everywhere, hundreds of them, weaving through traffic like schools of fish. Whole families balanced on single bikes. A woman in an Audi and face mask carrying what looked like a small tree. The driver was shouting into his phone in Vietnamese, honking at everything, and I sat in the back thinking I'd made a terrible error. Then we turned onto the beach road, and I saw the ocean. Proper blue, not the gray-green of the Atlantic I'd grown up with. Palm trees. White sand. The apartment was in a narrow building squeezed between a mini-mart and a tailor shop, but it had a balcony overlooking the water. The landlady, a tiny woman who spoke exactly 7 words of English, showed me how the air conditioning worked, handed me the keys, and left me standing there with my 2 suitcases, feeling simultaneously terrified and alive. The first week was resurrection. That's the only word for it. I'd wake at dawn, still on Irish time, and walk the beach before the heat became oppressive. Coffee at a street cart for 15,000 dong, about 30 cents, served in a tiny glass with condensed milk so sweet it made my teeth ache. Bought me from a woman with a cart near the apartment, 30,000 dong, maybe €1. I'd point at things on menus I couldn't read and eat whatever arrived, discovering I actually liked things I'd never have ordered back home. The expat blogs hadn't lied about the costs. My €7,000 monthly pension went absurdly far here. I walked everywhere those first days, trying to orient myself, get a sense of the place. The neighborhoods around my K were a mix of Vietnamese family homes, tourist hotels, and newer apartment blocks where expats lived. Children played in the streets. Grandmothers sat on tiny plastic stools watching the world go by. Motorbikes parked on sidewalks forced you into the road. It was loud, chaotic, nothing like the orderly streets of Cork, and I found myself smiling for the first time in I don't know how long. The locals were patient with my terrible Vietnamese. I learned a few phrases from YouTube videos, butchered the tones completely, and they'd smile and switch to English or just point. No one seemed annoyed. No one seemed to mind this elderly Irish man stumbling through their city like a lost child. But the expat community felt superficial. I'd meet other foreigners at cafes, mostly younger digital nomads working on laptops, or retirees like myself who talk endlessly about visa runs and where to get proper bacon. Nice enough people, but I wanted something more authentic, something that felt like actual connection to this place, rather than just existing inside an English-speaking bubble within it. Week 2, I found a flyer at a cafe. Talk and learn language exchange, it said. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 7 p.m., at a place called Highlands Coffee near the Marble Mountains. Expats practice Vietnamese. Locals practice English. Free. I went that Thursday, nervous as a teenager at his first dance. The cafe was packed. Round tables with mixed groups, some speaking Vietnamese slowly for foreigners who scribbled in notebooks, others practicing English conversation. I stood there holding a café soi da I'd ordered, unsure where to sit, and a woman at a table near the window waved me over. That was Lynn. She was 42, she'd tell me later. Wearing professional clothes, not the casual tourist wear most people had on. Dark trousers, a cream blouse, her hair pulled back neatly, poised. That's the word that comes to mind. She had this way of sitting that seemed elegant, composed. When she smiled, it reached her eyes. "Please sit," she said in perfect English, barely an accent. "I'm Lynn." "You're new here?" I sat, told her my name, that I'd arrived from Ireland 2 weeks prior, that my Vietnamese was hopeless. She laughed and said hers was excellent, so perhaps we could trade. She'd help me with tones, I could help her practice conversational English. She worked in hotel management, she explained, and good English was essential for advancement. We spent 2 hours talking, or rather, I talked, and she listened, asking questions that made me want to keep talking. What brought me to Vietnam? What was Ireland like? What had I done for work? When I mentioned teaching history for 40 years, her face lit up. She loved history, she said. Vietnamese history, French colonial period, the American War, all of it. I found myself explaining the parallels I'd noticed between Irish and Vietnamese history, colonization, and resistance. How small countries survive alongside empires. She was brilliant, engaged, curious, laughing at my rambling stories about trying to make 16-year-olds care about the Treaty of Limerick. At one point, I mentioned Margaret in passing, how she'd always said I could make anything sound interesting if you gave me long enough, and Lynn reached across the table and touched my hand gently. "You're widowed?" she asked. I nodded. 3 years. "Still wearing the ring," I said, pulling the chain from under my shirt where Margaret's wedding band hung next to mine. Lynn's expression shifted. "I understand loss," she said quietly. Her father had died when she was young, she explained. Her marriage had ended badly 5 years ago. She had a daughter at university in Hanoi, which was wonderful but lonely. She lived with her elderly mother in a small apartment across town, helping care for her. We talked until the cafe was closing, staff stacking chairs around us. When we finally stood to leave, Lynn suggested we meet for coffee outside the language exchange. She knew places tourists didn't find, she said. Real Da Nang. Would I like that? I would like that very much, I said. The next week blurred into a series of small discoveries. Lynn showed me a com tam place where locals ate, helped me order, explained what each dish was. She walked me through Han Market, translating vendor calls, teaching me how to bargain politely. Her pronunciation lessons were patient, amused by my Cork accent butchering Vietnamese tones. Every time I got something wrong, she'd repeat it slowly, encouraging, never making me feel stupid. We talked about everything. Her daughter Mai, studying economics at Hanoi University, the pressures of Vietnamese family life, caring for aging parents while trying to build a career. Her job at a hotel on the beach, managing guest relations, dealing with difficult tourists. I told her about Siobhan and Ewan, about Margaret's illness, about the house in Cork that had become a tomb. She listened, really listened, the way Margaret used to, asking follow-up questions, remembering details from previous conversations. Third week, we went to the Marble Mountains together. Lynn insisted on paying the entrance fee before I could protest, said it was her city, she was the host. We climbed the steps to the temples carved into the rock, and she explained the Buddhist traditions, the history of the place, mixing English and Vietnamese names seamlessly. At the top, looking out over Da Nang spread below us, the ocean beyond, she turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "You seem lighter here, Declan, like you can breathe again." She was right. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt something other than the weight of grief. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. The sense that this 67-year-old history teacher might have chapters left to write, after all. That evening, we had dinner at a seafood place Lynn chose, down an alley I'd never have found on my own. She ordered for both of us, things I couldn't pronounce, and we ate with our hands, laughing when I made a mess of the crab. The bill came to maybe 15 euros for both of us. I paid before she could argue, and she smiled and said next time she'd choose somewhere more expensive to make it fair. Walking back along the Han River, the bridge lit up and changing colors, Lynn suggested we try the night market together the following week. I realized I was already thinking about the following week, already building my schedule around seeing her, already feeling that particular pull of early attraction, not sexual attraction primarily, though she was lovely, but something deeper, connection, purpose. The sense of being seen as more than just a grieving widower shuffling through his remaining years. She made me feel like the version of myself I'd been before Margaret got sick, before the house became a museum of loss. I should have been more careful. I should have remembered I was a 67-year-old retired teacher, not exactly a catch. But loneliness makes you stupid, makes you grateful for any kind of warmth. And Lynn was very warm indeed. By the end of month 1, Lynn and I were seeing each other 4 times weekly, then 5, then nearly every day. The routine became addictive in the way good routines are, the kind that make you feel like you're building something sustainable rather than just passing time. She introduced me to Vietnamese poetry during our evening walks along the Han River. Xuan Di Shu, she'd say, then recite verses in Vietnamese before translating them into English. Love poetry, longing poetry, the kind of romantic imagery I hadn't paid attention to since university. There was one about spring rain and separation that made her voice go soft. I thought of Yeats, of the poems I'd quoted to Margaret when we were young and dramatic about everything. The teacher in me was delighted. Here I was at 67, learning about a whole literary tradition I'd been completely ignorant of. Xuan Fang, Ling explained, was a feminist poet from the 18th century who wrote verses that appeared innocent but contained hidden meanings, double entendres that mocked the patriarchy. I found myself taking notes, asking questions, wanting to understand the historical context. This wasn't tourist Vietnam. This was culture, real cultural exchange, exactly what I'd hoped for. What struck me most was that Lynn never asked for money. We'd split bills at restaurants, or she'd pay one time and I'd pay the next. When I offered to cover things, she'd wave me off, insist on fairness. She had her own career, her own income from the hotel. She wasn't like the women the expat forums warned about, the bar girls looking for foreign sponsors. Lynn had dignity. She had her own life. She talked about her daughter May constantly, the way mothers do. Mai was 19, studying economics at Hanoi University, struggling with a difficult statistics course. She had a boyfriend Lynn wasn't sure about, too focused on motorbikes and not enough on his future. She showed me photos on her phone, a serious-looking young woman at a desk surrounded by textbooks, another of her in a university polo shirt. I told Lynn about Siobhan's finance career, Eoin's work in tech, and we bonded over that particular anxiety parents share about whether their children are making good choices. Month 2, my service department lease came up for renewal. The landlady wanted to raise the rent. And anyway, the place had started feeling temporary, transitional. I mentioned this to Lynn over coffee, and she suggested I look in An Thung, the neighborhood where she worked. Still near the beach, she said, but more local, better value, closer to her. Closer to her. I heard what she wasn't quite saying. We spent a weekend looking at apartments. She knew which buildings were well-maintained, which landlords spoke English, where the good cafes were. We found a 2-bedroom place on the 3rd floor of a building, 2 streets back from the beach. 15 million dong monthly, about 600 euros, more than the serviced apartment, but it had a proper kitchen, a balcony with a view of the street life below, and it felt more permanent somehow. When we were signing the lease, Lynn mentioned casually that it would be nice if we could spend more time together, that maybe she could stay some nights when her work schedule allowed. I realized she was living with her elderly mother in a cramped apartment across town, sharing a single bedroom. The living arrangement wasn't ideal for a 42-year-old professional woman trying to maintain some independence. I suggested we furnish the place properly, make it comfortable. The 2nd bedroom could be a guest room or an office, and we'd get a decent sofa, proper appliances, make it our space. That's what I said, our space. Looking back now, that's when the spending started, though it didn't feel like spending at the time. It felt like investing, building something. Lynn took me to furniture shops she knew, vendors in the industrial area outside town where expats didn't go. She negotiated prices in Vietnamese, got me deals I'd never have managed on my own. A sofa, dining table, mattresses, kitchen equipment, air conditioning units for both bedrooms, a proper refrigerator. The bill kept climbing. 2 suod million dong, 2 suod red. By the time we'd finished, I'd spent about 8,000 euros. That was higher than I'd planned, significantly higher. I had 15,000 in savings when I arrived, and I'd been living on my pension, so I still had most of that. But 8,000 was a substantial chunk. I did the mental arithmetic while signing the transfer at the bank. I'd have about 7,000 left in savings, but my pension covered living expenses comfortably, and I was thinking long term now. If Lynn and I were building something together, if this was going to be home, then it needed to feel like home. She never asked me to spend that money. That's what I told myself. It was my suggestion, my idea to furnish it nicely. She just helped me navigate the process, made sure I didn't get ripped off by vendors who saw a foreign face and doubled their prices. By month 3, we were essentially living together. Lynn stayed 5 nights a week, kept clothes in the wardrobe, toiletries in the bathroom. She'd cook Vietnamese dishes I was learning to love, kadri ga on cooler evenings, can chua when it was too hot for anything heavy. She'd come home from the hotel with stories about difficult guests, and I'd tell her about my Vietnamese lessons, my walks, the books I was reading. I set up a FaceTime call with Siobhan and Eoin, introduced them to Lynn. She was charming, asked about their work, commented on how much they looked like me. After she left the room, Siobhan's face was carefully neutral. "She seems nice, da," Siobhan said. "Just be careful, yeah?" Eoin was more relaxed, said she seemed lovely, seemed to make me happy, which was what mattered. My life had structure again. Morning coffee on the balcony watching the street wake up. Vietnamese lessons 3 mornings a week with a tutor Lynn found for me. Afternoon walks, sometimes to the beach, sometimes to the neighborhoods. Evenings with Lynn, cooking together, watching Vietnamese TV. I mostly couldn't understand while she translated, or just sitting on the balcony talking while motorbikes buzzed past below, and the heat finally started to break. I'd read the expat forums. I knew the warnings. Foreign men getting taken advantage of. Women targeting pensioners for money. Elaborate schemes to extract cash for fake emergencies. But Lynn wasn't like that. She had a proper career in hotel management, earned her own money, paid her own bills. She never asked me for anything. The furniture was my idea. Living together was a mutual decision. She'd explain Vietnamese culture to me, the family obligations I didn't understand coming from Ireland, where adult children were expected to be independent. Here, she'd say, children support their parents. It's expected. You take care of the people who raised you. Her mother was elderly, needed help with rent and medical costs. Lynn's salary covered it, but it was tight. Her ex-husband contributed nothing. Her siblings did what they could, but they had their own families. I'd nod and think about how I'd supported my own parents in their final years, how Margaret and I had paid for her mother's care home. It seemed culturally universal, this obligation to the previous generation, just expressed differently here. Looking back, I can see how carefully she was laying groundwork. But at the time, it felt like education, like I was learning to understand Vietnamese family structures, becoming less of a tourist and more of someone who actually understood how life worked here. The teacher in me appreciated that. I'd spent 40 years trying to make history relevant by showing how different cultures approach similar problems. Here I was, living it. She was different, I told myself. Not like the stories you heard. Those were bar girls, women without education or prospects looking for easy money. Lynn was educated, professional, had her own life. The fact that she'd chosen me, a 67-year-old retired teacher with a Cork accent and an expanding waistline, meant something. It meant I was more than just a pension. It meant she saw something in me worth building a life around. I believed that completely. I needed to believe it. The loneliness I'd felt in Cork, the grief that had been crushing me for 3 years, had lifted. I'd wake up with Lynn beside me and feel purposeful again, needed. Not just a widower shuffling through his remaining years, but someone building something new, learning a new language, experiencing a new culture, falling in love again at an age when most men have given up on that possibility. It felt like resurrection, like I'd been given a second chance at happiness after Margaret's death had ended the first one. I should have been asking more questions. Should have wondered why a 42-year-old professional woman wanted to spend her time with a man 25 years her senior, who couldn't speak her language properly, and had nothing particularly interesting to offer besides a stable pension. Should have noticed that she never introduced me to her friends, never invited me to meet her mother, never suggested I video call with Mai, despite my offers to help with her university coursework. But I didn't ask those questions. I was too busy being grateful, too busy feeling alive again, too busy ignoring the small voice in the back of my head that sounded suspiciously like Siobhan saying, "Be careful, Damanth." 3 ended with me thinking I'd found the secret those YouTube videos had promised. A good life in Vietnam. Connection. Purpose. Maybe even love. Though I was too scared to use that word yet. too scared to jinx it. Everything was perfect, which should have been my first clue that everything was about to fall apart. Month 4 passed peacefully. Too peacefully, looking back. We'd settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable, domestic, permanent. Lynn would leave for the hotel at 8 a.m., return around 6 p.m., and we'd cook dinner together or walk to one of the local places she knew. Weekends, we'd explore Da Nang on a rented motorbike, her driving because I was too terrified of the traffic, me clinging to her waist like a nervous child. Then, month 5 arrived, and with it, the first real ask. I remember the exact moment. Lynn came home from work early, around 4 p.m., which was unusual. Her face was red, eyes puffy. She'd been crying. I asked what was wrong, and she just shook her head, sat on the sofa we'd picked out together, and started crying again. It took 20 minutes to get the story out of her. Mai's university fees were due. $1.5 million, about 4,500 euros. Lynn's ex-husband had agreed to pay them as part of their divorce settlement, but he'd disappeared. Remarried some woman in Saigon, changed his phone number, blocked Lynn on everything. She'd been trying to reach him for weeks. The fees were due in 5 days, or Mai would be dropped from her courses. Lynn was devastated, not just upset, but properly broken. She kept saying she'd failed as a mother, that Mai would have to drop out, that her daughter's future was ruined because of her useless ex-husband and her own inability to earn enough. She was already supporting her mother, couldn't manage both. Her siblings had their own children's school fees. There was no one else. I offered immediately, didn't even think about it. Education is sacred, that's what I said to her. I'd spent 40 years teaching, watching teenagers struggle to afford university, seeing bright kids give up because their families couldn't manage the fees. I thought of Siobhan and Eowyn's university years, how Margaret and I had scraped together the money, taken extra jobs, delayed our own retirements to make sure our children had opportunities. This was no different. Lynn protested. Said she couldn't accept, it was too much, she'd find another way. But her protests were weak, performative almost. I insisted, told her Mai's education was an investment in her future, that I'd be honored to help, that this was what people who cared about each other did. The next day I went to the bank and wired 105 million dong to Lynn's account. She cried again when I showed her the transfer receipt, hugged me, said I'd saved Mai's future, that she'd never forget this, that I was a better man than her ex-husband had ever been. It felt good, I won't lie. Felt purposeful, like I was actually helping, actually making a difference in someone's life, rather than just existing as a retired teacher with nothing better to do than drink cafe swada and watch the motorbikes go by. I mentioned it to Siobhan on our next call, casually, like it was no big deal. Helped Lynn with her daughter's university fees, I said, just like we did for you and Eowyn. There was a long pause on the line. Then Siobhan asked how much. When I told her, her voice went very careful. That's a lot of money, da. It's an investment in education, I said, hearing the defensiveness in my own voice. Have you met the daughter? She's in Hanoi, busy with studies. Another pause. Just be careful with your money, okay? You're on a fixed income. I'm 67, not senile, I snapped, then immediately regretted it. Siobhan was just looking out for me the way I'd looked out for her and Eowyn their whole lives. But her concern felt like judgment, like she thought I was some doddering old fool being taken advantage of. Month 6 brought the health crisis. Lynn got a call from her sister in the countryside. Their mother had collapsed, was in hospital, needed gallbladder surgery, emergency surgery, not something that could wait. The public hospital had a 3-month waiting list. Private hospital could do it immediately, but wanted 140 million dong, about 6,000 euros. Lynn was frantic. Showed me medical documents, all in Vietnamese, which I couldn't read. She translated, pointing at numbers, explaining urgency, risks of waiting, complications that could arise. Her mother was 68, not strong, couldn't wait months. Lynn's siblings were contributing what they could, maybe 40 million dong between them, but Lynn needed to cover the rest. I remembered Margaret's cancer treatment, the private hospital in Cork, the urgency of medical decisions when someone you love is sick, how quickly costs mounted, how none of that mattered when it was life or death. Margaret's treatment had cost us nearly 20,000 euros out of pocket after insurance. I'd have paid double, triple, anything to buy her more time. I paid 100 million dong transferred to Lynn's account that afternoon. She left the next day for her mother's village, was gone 5 days while her mother recovered. She sent photos from the hospital, her mother in a bed looking small and frail, thanked me via text message every day, said her siblings were grateful, said I'd saved her mother's life. When she came back, exhausted and emotional, I held her and felt like I was finally doing something meaningful with my pension money instead of just accumulating it for children who didn't need it. But there were warning signs, if I'd been paying attention. Lynn took all phone calls from Mai outside, or in Vietnamese. When I asked about it, she said it was private mother-daughter talk, that Mai preferred speaking Vietnamese, that some conversations were just between them. Fair enough, I thought. Siobhan and I had conversations we didn't share with everyone. I suggested a few times that we video call Mai together, that I'd love to meet her properly, maybe help with her statistics coursework since I'd taught basic stats as part of history methodology. Lynn always had reasons why not. Mai was shy, didn't like video calls. Mai was busy with exams. Mai's internet connection in her dorm was terrible. Mai preferred texting. I'd see Lynn texting in Vietnamese. Rapid conversations with someone she said was Mai. But she never offered to translate, and I didn't want to seem controlling or suspicious. When other Vietnamese people approached us in public, vendors at the market, neighbors in our building, other customers at restaurants, Lynn sometimes tensed. She'd answer curtly in Vietnamese, sometimes actually hurrying me away. I asked about it once, and she said some people were nosy, that in Vietnamese culture, there were complicated class dynamics, that she didn't like discussing her private business with strangers who'd gossip. I accepted that. Ireland has its own small-town gossip culture. I understood privacy, understood not wanting your business spread around, and Da Nang felt small in that way. Everyone knowing everyone, vendors remembering customers, neighbors watching each other's comings and goings. The rational explanations were always there. Cultural differences, privacy norms, language barriers, parent-child relationships that work differently here than in Ireland. I taught myself to see these things as learning opportunities, chances to understand Vietnamese culture better rather than red flags. Because I didn't want to see red flags, I wanted to see a future. A life I was building with someone who cared about me for more than my pension. I wanted to believe that at 67, after 3 years of grief and loneliness, I deserved this second chance at happiness. By the end of month 6, I'd spent 10,500 euros beyond the 8,000 for furniture. My savings were down to about 3,500. But I still had my monthly pension, and Lynn and I were talking about the future now. Carefully, hypothetically, but talking. She mentioned marriage once, casually, while we were cooking. Said maybe when her mother was healthier, when Maya graduated, when things were more stable. Nothing definite. Just the idea floating there between us like a promise. I floated it past Siobhan and Eoin on separate calls. Eoin said if I was happy, he was happy for me, but maybe take it slow. Siobhan asked pointed questions about prenuptial agreements, about protecting my pension, about making sure any marriage wouldn't affect my financial security. She worked in finance, she said. She'd seen situations. I got irritated. Told her I'd been married to her mother for 38 years. I understood how marriage worked. I wasn't some naive young fool. She backed off, but I could hear the concern she wasn't voicing. I told myself she didn't understand. Couldn't understand. She had her partner in London, her career, her whole life ahead of her. She couldn't know what it was like to be 67 and alone and to find someone who made you feel purposeful again. Month 6 ended with me feeling secure, settled. Like I'd successfully navigated early relationship challenges and come out stronger. I'd helped with real problems, meaningful problems, education, and healthcare. The things that actually mattered. The money I'd spent felt like investment in our future together. In Mai's education, in Lynn's mother's health, in building a life here that meant something more than just running away from grief. I had no idea that the real test, the real ask, was still coming, or that by the time it arrived, I'd be too invested, too committed, too desperate to believe in what we were building to see it for what it actually was. A carefully constructed illusion designed to separate a lonely widower from his pension, one crisis at a time. Months 7 and 8 felt stable, deceptively so. The kind of calm that comes after you've weathered storms together and think you've earned some peace. Lynn was attentive, grateful, more affectionate than she'd been before. She'd thank me randomly for helping with Mai's fees, for saving her mother's life, for being the kind of man who understood family obligations. It felt good. Validation. Proof that I'd made the right choices. We talked about the future more openly now. Marriage came up in casual conversation, always hypothetically, always with qualifiers. When her mother is stronger, Lynn would say. When Mai graduates and is settled in her career. When we've had more time to be sure. She framed it as being cautious, responsible, wanting to do things properly. I appreciated that. Told myself it showed she was serious about us thinking long-term. I mentioned the possibility to Eoin first. He was supportive in that careful way of his. If you're happy, that's what matters, he said. Just maybe take your time, yeah? No need to rush anything. I told him I was 67. I didn't have unlimited time to take, which made him laugh uncomfortably. Siobhan was harder. I made the mistake of bringing it up during one of our regular video calls, thinking she'd be pleased I was moving forward with my life. Instead, she went into what I can only describe as finance professional mode. Started asking about prenuptial agreements, asset protection, whether I'd consulted a solicitor about international marriage law, whether I understood how my pension would be affected. I'm not planning to marry a stranger off the street, I said, more defensively than I'd intended. I've known Lynn for 8 months. We're living together. I'm not senile. I didn't say you were senile, Siobhan replied, her voice very measured. I'm just saying you should protect yourself legally. You worked 40 years for that pension. I'm not questioning your judgment, just suggesting you talk to a professional before making any major decisions. We ended the call tersely. I felt patronized, treated like a child who couldn't manage his own affairs. Margaret and I had raised Siobhan to be independent, to think critically, but I hadn't expected her to turn that critical thinking on me. Lynn noticed I was irritated after the call, asked what was wrong. I told her Siobhan was being overprotective, asking invasive questions about our relationship. Lynn nodded sympathetically, said adult children often struggled when their widowed parents found new partners, that it was natural for Siobhan to be protective. She understood. No pressure. We'd take things at our own pace. That understanding, that lack of pressure, convinced me more than any pushing would have. Month 9 arrived with the kind of crisis that, looking back, I should have seen coming from a kilometer away. Lynn came home early again. I was starting to recognize the pattern. Early arrival, distressed face, tears. This time she'd been crying in the taxi, she said. Her hotel was restructuring. Tourism had been slower than projected, management was cutting positions, and her job was likely gone within weeks. She'd know for certain by the end of the month. I held her while she cried, asked practical questions about severance, about her prospects at other hotels, whether she'd need help with rent until she found something new. She waved those questions away. The money wasn't the worst part, she said, though it mattered. The worst part was the loss of face. The professional humiliation of being let go after working her way up to management level. In Vietnamese culture, she explained, job loss carried a particular shame. People would talk. Her family would worry. We talked for hours that evening. I suggested she use the time to look for better positions, maybe in Hanoi or Saigon where the hotel industry was bigger. She said maybe, but she had her mother here, had commitments. Then she mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that her friend Thon was opening a guest house in Hoi An. I'd heard about Thon before. Lynn's university friend, smart businesswoman, had worked in hospitality for years. They'd stayed close. Thon had found a property in Hoi An's Old Town, was renovating it into a boutique guest house, 10 rooms, upscale but affordable. She was looking for investors, Lynn said. Silent partners who provide capital in exchange for ownership stakes and monthly dividend income. For 280 million dong, about 12,000 euros, Lynn and I could own 30%. Thathar had done projections. The guest house would generate about 20 to 28 million dong monthly, once established, around 800 to 1,200 euros. Our 30% would be 6 to 8 million, maybe 250 euros monthly. Not a fortune, but passive income. A hedge against Lynn losing her job. A retirement supplement for me. Lynn showed me documents. A business plan in English, professionally formatted, financial projections showing occupancy rates, seasonal variations, operating costs. Photos of the property mid-renovation. Traditional Vietnamese architecture with French colonial touches. Perfect for the heritage tourism. Hua and attracted. Letters of intent from booking platforms. Everything looked legitimate. This would be our investment, Lynn said. Our future. Our path to financial independence together. If she lost her hotel job, we'd have the guest house income. We could visit Hoi An regularly, check on the property, maybe even live there part-time eventually. It was a real business opportunity, not charity. Partnership. I hesitated. This was serious money. I had about 3,500 euros left in savings. My pension was 7,000 monthly, which covered living expenses comfortably, but 12,000 would wipe out my savings and then some. I'd need to use about 8,500 from my monthly pension. but I reviewed the documents carefully. Spent 3 days going through the business plan, checking the arithmetic, looking at comparable guest houses on booking sites. The projected occupancy rates seemed conservative. The operating costs looked reasonable. Hoi and tourism was strong, growing. The property location was excellent according to Google Maps. I did mental arithmetic constantly. If the guest house generated even the lower projection, €800 monthly, that would be 9,600 annually on a 12,000 investment, an 80% annual return. Even accounting for variation and unexpected costs, it seemed solid. More than that, it felt like finally building something. Not just spending money on emergencies, but investing in our shared future. Creating passive income that would outlast both of us, something we could leave to Mai and to Siobhan and Eowyn. A legacy. I called Siobhan ostensibly to ask about investment analysis, framing it hypothetically. She asked pointed questions. Had I seen audited financial statements? Did I have independent verification of the property's value? Was there a formal partnership agreement with my name on legal documents? Would I have actual ownership or just a revenue-sharing arrangement? I got defensive again. Told her I'd seen the business plan. It looked professional. I wasn't born yesterday. She sighed. Just be careful, Da. If something seems too good to be true, it usually is. But it didn't seem too good to be true. It seemed like a reasonable return for reasonable risk. The kind of small business investment people made all the time. What convinced me, ultimately, was Lynn's approach. She didn't pressure me, said we should think carefully, that €12,000 was a lot of money, that she'd understand completely if I wasn't comfortable. Maybe we could invest less, buy a smaller stake. Or I could just loan her part of it. She'd pay me back when she found new work. That reasonableness, that lack of manipulation, convinced me more than any sales pitch could have. This was a partnership decision. We were building something together. I transferred 280 million dong to Lynn's account. She'd combine it with some savings of her own, handle the paperwork with Thane. We'd be registered as partners. I'd receive official ownership documents once the Vietnamese bureaucracy processed everything, probably 4 to 6 weeks. Lynn was overjoyed, genuinely, effusively happy. She talked about visiting Hoi An together once the renovation's finished, meeting Don, seeing our investment, maybe spending weekends there. She showed me booking sites, talked about decor choices, asked my opinion on breakfast menus. It felt collaborative, exciting, like we were finally building a life I'd come to Vietnam hoping to find. She mentioned marriage again, more concretely this time. Said when we're married, we should make sure all our investments are in both names, protect each other legally. I liked how she thought about practical things, how she saw us as a unit. By the end of month 9, I'd spent my entire savings plus €8,500 from my pension. My bank account was nearly empty except for what I'd need for monthly expenses. But I had a partner, a home, an investment in our shared future, and the realistic prospect of marriage to someone who made me feel purposeful again. I ignored the small voice in my head that sounded like Siobhan saying, "Be careful." Ignored the fact that I still hadn't met May, hadn't met Lynn's mother, hadn't met Than, hadn't seen the guest house property with my own eyes. Ignored the fact that every few months there was another crisis, another urgent need, another opportunity that required my money. I told myself I was investing, not spending, building, not being taken advantage of. I'd made a deliberate choice to trust someone, to build a life with them, to take the kinds of risks that any relationship requires. Month 9 ended with me feeling like I'd finally committed fully. No more hedging, no more holding back. I was all in on this relationship, this life, this future we were building together, which meant that when it all fell apart, as it inevitably would, I'd have nothing left to cushion the fall. Month 10 began with cracks. Small ones at first, the kind you tell yourself are normal relationship fluctuations rather than structural problems. Lynn seemed distracted. She'd come home from work and go straight to her phone, texting rapidly in Vietnamese, then step out onto the balcony to take calls. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd say Mai, or her mother, or her sister about mother's recovery. Always plausible explanations. Always delivered with just enough irritation that I felt guilty for asking. She was less available generally. Stayed at the hotel late more often, said tourism was picking up and they needed all hands before the layoffs happened. Came home exhausted, wanted to eat and sleep rather than talk. Our evening walks stopped. The poetry recitations stopped. We still lived together, but it felt more like cohabitation than partnership. When I pressed, gently, Asking if everything was all right between us, she'd blame stress. Her job situation, her mother's slow recovery, Maya's upcoming exams, the guest house renovations running behind schedule. So many pressures. She appreciated my patience. Things would get better soon. I tried to be understanding, told myself this was what long-term relationships looked like, that not every phase could be honeymoon intensity, that supporting someone through difficult times was part of commitment. But I noticed things. The way she'd tense when her phone buzzed, the way she'd angle the screen away from me when texting, the way certain calls would make her leave not just the room, but the apartment entirely, saying she needed privacy, needed to walk while talking. I asked about the guest house paperwork. When would I receive the ownership documents? Lynn said Than was handling it. Vietnamese bureaucracy was notoriously slow. These things took months sometimes. She showed me renovation photos, messages from Than about progress. The property looked good, she said, almost ready. Maybe another month or two before we could visit. I suggested we drive to Hoi An for a weekend, see it ourselves. Lynn said it wasn't ready for viewing yet, still mid-construction, dangerous with tools and materials everywhere. Better to wait until it was finished, make a proper celebration of it. Looking back, I should have insisted, should have gotten in a grab and gone myself. But I didn't want to seem controlling, didn't want to demonstrate the kind of distrust that poisons relationships. I wanted to believe her explanations, needed to believe them. Month 11 arrived with a Facebook message that destroyed everything. It came from Patrick Murphy, a student I'd taught 15 years earlier at St. Finbar's. Bright kid, had gone on to study languages at Trinity, now teaching English in Hanoi. We'd connected on Facebook when I moved to Vietnam, exchanged a few messages about expat life, nothing deep. His message said, Mr. said, O'Sullivan, hope this isn't inappropriate, but I saw a photo of someone who looks like your girlfriend's daughter and wanted to make sure it's not a case of mistaken identity. The name is different and she looks older than I thought you'd mentioned. Might be nothing but thought you should know. He included a link. I clicked it. My hands were shaking before I consciously understood why. The Facebook profile belonged to someone named Yingxi Tren, age 24.s. Location, Hanoi. The profile photo was Mai. Unmistakably Mai. The same serious face from the photos Lynn had shown me, but older, harder, wearing makeup and a low-cut top rather than university casual wear. I scrolled through the public posts, photos from a karaoke bar, Nji, and other young women in hostess outfits, arms around drunk men, check-ins at nightclubs in Hanoi's old quarter, selfies that screamed entertainment industry rather than economic student. The posts went back 2 years. No mention of university, no textbooks, no statistics, homework. I sat there staring at the screen, the apartment silent around me, and felt reality shift. Not collapse, shift. Like I'd been looking at an optical illusion and suddenly saw the other image, the one that had been there all along. I searched for Lynn's full name, something I'd never done, trusting her, respecting her privacy. The first result was her profile, the one she'd shown me. But there was another profile with a slightly different spelling. Public, not, privacy restricted like the one she'd shown me. I clicked. Different age, 45, not 42. Different employment history. Receptionist at Hotel Fusion. Receptionist at Ariana Resort. Part-time front desk work at Novotel. No management positions. No career progression. Just a series of part-time hotel jobs. The kind that paid barely enough to live on. Photos with Mai, tagged as niece, not daughter, niece. Photos with a man, tagged in older posts, clearly a boyfriend or ex-boyfriend. Recent photos from 3 months ago, 2 months ago, while Lynn was supposedly living with me, building our life together. I sat there for 3 hours, clicking through profiles, screenshots, following links. Found Ningxi's other social media. Instagram posts from karaoke bars, TikTok videos. A whole life that had nothing to do with economics or university or being 19 years old. I felt physically sick. Got up, went to the bathroom, dry heaved over the toilet, came back, looked at the evidence again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the evidence was clear, brutally clear. Mai wasn't Lynn's daughter. She was her niece. She wasn't 19. She was 24. She wasn't a university student. She worked in Hanoi nightlife. The 4,500 euros I'd sent for university fees had paid for exactly nothing related to education. And if that was a lie, what else was a lie? I spent the next 3 days gathering evidence, screenshots, links, dates, cross-references. I moved like a man underwater, going through motions, while my mind processed the implications. The hotel management job, the mother's surgery, the guest house investment. How much of it was real? Any of it? Lynn noticed something was wrong, asked repeatedly what was bothering me. I said I was fine, just tired, not sleeping well. She seemed relieved, accepted the explanation quickly. That relief felt like confirmation. On the third day, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Lynn came home from work around 6 p.m. I was sitting at the dining table we'd picked out together. Laptop open, screenshots printed and arranged in front of me. Translation app ready. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said. My voice was steady. That surprised me. She looked at the laptop, the screenshots, and her face did something complicated. Not surprised exactly. Resigned maybe. Like she'd been waiting for this. "Sit down," I said. She sat. I showed her the screenshots one by one. Patrick's message, Ningxi's profile, her real profile. The photos with the ex-boyfriend from 2 months ago. I didn't yell, didn't accuse. Just showed her the evidence and asked her to explain. She started crying, real tears, not performative ones. But she didn't deny anything. The story came out in pieces. Mai was her niece, yes, not her daughter. The daughter story was easier, she said, more sympathetic. Made her seem more responsible, more stable. Maya did live in Hanoi but worked as a karaoke hostess, not studying economics. The university fees were made up. She'd needed money, seen an opportunity, taken it. "What about your mother's surgery?" I asked. "Real," Lynn said, but her siblings had already paid for most of it. She'd contributed maybe 20 million dong, about 800 million dong, about 800 million I'd given her. The hotel management job? Part-time receptionist work, she admitted. She'd lost the job 2 months ago, not recently. She'd been unemployed while I thought she was going to work every day. The guest house investment, her voice went very quiet. "Thaw exists," she said. They were friends at school. But Thaw, his cousin's friend, had mentioned maybe wanting to open a guest house someday. Nothing concrete, no property, no renovation, no business plan beyond what Lynn had created in a Word document. My name wasn't on any paperwork because there was no paperwork. The 12,000 euros was just gone. "Where?" I asked. "Where did the money go?" "Debts," she said. Her ex-boyfriend lent her money last year. She owed him. Her sister needed help with school fees for her real children. She gambled some, lost it. Some went to Maya to help with rent. Some she just spent. New phone, new clothes, dinners with friends, normal things. I sat there doing brutal arithmetic, in my head 20,000 euros for furniture, 4,500 for fake university fees, 6,000 for mostly paid for surgery, 12,000 for a non-existent guest house, plus smaller amounts I'd paid for dinners, taxis, random expenses over 11 months, approximately 35,500 euros. Maybe more if I counted everything. "Why?" I asked finally. "Just why?" Lynn looked at me, tears still streaming, and said something I'll never forget. "You needed me," she said. "You were so lonely. I gave you company, gave you happiness for almost a year. That's worth something, isn't it?" The logic was staggering. She charged me 35,500 euros for companionship and thought that made it somehow fair. I told her to leave. She packed that night. Took her clothes, her toiletries, some kitchen items she said she'd bought. Left without the drama I'd expected. No pleading, no promises to change. Just a quiet acceptance that it was over. At the door, she turned back. "I'm sorry, Declan. I did care about you. That part was real." Then she left, and I sat alone in the apartment we'd furnished together, doing arithmetic. I wished I didn't have to do. I spent the first week after Lynn left just sitting in the apartment, staring at furniture we'd chosen together, doing calculations that made me feel sicker every time I added them up. 8,000 euros for furniture, 4,500 for university fees that paid for nothing, 6,000 for a surgery that was mostly already covered, 2,000 for a guest house that didn't exist, plus all the smaller things I hadn't tracked carefully. Dinners, taxis, gifts, random expenses, 3,500 euros, give or take. More than 2 years of what I'd saved from selling Margaret's car and downsizing our life together. Not bankrupting exactly, I still had my pension. But my comfortable retirement had become a cautious one. I'd need to budget carefully, maybe find part-time work. But the money was the easy part to quantify. What I'd really lost was harder to calculate. For 11 months, I'd felt purposeful again. Needed. Like I was building something meaningful rather than just marking time until death. That feeling turned out to cost about 32.27 euros per month. Expensive therapy, as it turned out. I had to tell Siobhan and Ewan. Put it off for 3 days, rehearsing different versions, trying to find a way to say it that didn't make me sound like a complete fool. Finally just called them both, conference style, and laid it out plainly. Here's what happened. Here's how much I lost. Yes, you were right. No, I don't want to talk about it in detail. Siobhan's response was worse than anger would have been. Oh, da, she said, in this carefully neutral voice that somehow contained all her unspoken, I told you so's. Are you okay? Do you need money? I'm fine, I said. The pension covers things. I just wanted you to know. Eoin was more straightforward. That's rough, da. I'm sorry. Do you want to come home for a bit? Home. The word felt strange. The house in Cork, empty and cold, waiting. I couldn't face it. Couldn't face the neighbors asking how Vietnam was, the pitying looks, the knowledge that I'd run away from grief straight into something worse. I'm staying in Vietnam, I said. Just moving somewhere else, somewhere cheaper. I chose Hoi An. Ironic, really, considering the guest house that never existed was supposedly there. But Hoi An was cheaper than Da Nang. Beautiful, full of expats and tourists, so I could disappear into the crowd. Most importantly, it had no memories of Lynn. I'd never been there with her. It could be clean. Found a small apartment for 8 million dong monthly, about 350 euros. One bedroom, basic kitchen, no view to speak of. But it was mine. Paid for honestly with pension money that no one else had a claim on. I moved with 2 suitcases, same as I'd arrived with. Left the furniture. Couldn't bear to look at it anymore. In Hoi An, I found work teaching English at a local language center, 1.4 million dong monthly. About 600 euros. Not much, but it helped. More than the money, it gave me structure. Classes 4 days weekly, mostly teenagers preparing for university entrance exams. Real university entrance exams this time. I helped them with genuine applications, checked their essays, wrote honest reference letters, small redemptions. I kept my financial business private. Told no one about Lynn, about the money, about any of it. Just another expat teacher, bit older than most, kept to himself. Made a few acquaintances. Other teachers, local colleagues, parents of students who appreciated my help. Casual friendships, nothing deep. I wasn't ready for deep. I still wear Margaret's ring on a chain around my neck. Touch it sometimes, reminded of what real love actually looked like. 40 years of arguing over whose turn it was to take out the bins. Joint decisions about wallpaper and mortgages. Her hand in mine at Siobhan's graduation. Both of us crying at Eoin's wedding. That was real. What I had with Lynn was a transaction I was too lonely to recognize as one. 18 months after arriving in Vietnam, I'm recording this story, not because I'm proud of it, because maybe someone else needs to hear it. Someone sitting in Cork or Manchester or Sydney watching YouTube videos about affordable retirement in Southeast Asia, thinking they can outrun grief or loneliness by getting on a plane. Here's what I learned. The surprising benefits, as it were. First benefit, I'm more foolish than I thought, but more resilient than I knew. At 67, I survived my own stupidity twice in one lifetime. Once thinking loneliness could be cured by geography, twice thinking it could be cured by someone young and lovely, finding me fascinating when I've never been particularly fascinating. Second benefit, I learned what rescue fantasies actually cost. I thought I was rescuing Lynn from poverty, from an unfair ex-husband, from the struggles of single motherhood. She thought she was rescuing me from grief and isolation. Both of us were wrong. You can't rescue someone who doesn't need rescuing. And you definitely can't buy your way out of grief at 32.27 euros per month. Third benefit, I learned to read the signs I'd ignored. When someone seems too interested in you for qualities you've never demonstrated, check what you're actually demonstrating. Probably your bank balance. When every few months there's another crisis requiring your money, that's not bad luck. That's a pattern. When someone won't introduce you to their friends or family, won't let you video call their supposed daughter, tenses up when locals approach you in public, those aren't cultural differences. Those are warnings. Fourth benefit, I learned that love and loneliness feel similar enough to be mistaken for each other, especially when you're desperate. The warm feeling I got when Lynn laughed at my stories, asked about my teaching career, made me feel seen. That was loneliness being temporarily relieved, not love being built. Love is what Margaret and I had, shared history, mutual sacrifice, someone who knows your worst qualities and chooses you anyway. What I had with Lynn was a business arrangement I was too proud to recognize. But here's the real benefit, the actually surprising one. My life now is smaller but honest. I teach kids who actually want to learn. I help with real university applications. I have colleagues who like me for being a decent teacher, not for my pension. I've stopped looking for grand second acts or resurrection stories. I drink coffee on my balcony in the morning. I read. I walk. I occasionally meet friends for dinner and split the bill fairly. Is it the life I imagined when I left Cork? No. Is it better than sitting in that empty house drowning in Margaret's absence? Yes. Is it what those YouTube videos promised? Not even close. But it's mine, and it's real, and no one's taking 35,500 euros from me to maintain the illusion. I still love Vietnam. That's the strange part. The coffee, the warmth, the chaos of motorbikes and street vendors, the genuine kindness I've found from Vietnamese people who aren't trying to scam me. The country isn't the problem. My expectations were the problem. My loneliness was the problem. My desperate need to believe I deserved another love story was the problem. So here I am, 68 now, teaching English in Hoi An, living cautiously within my means, still missing Margaret every day but not drowning in it anymore. Wiser, poorer, and surprisingly okay with both. If you're watching this thinking about making the same move I made, here's my advice. Come to Vietnam if you want. It's a beautiful country. But don't come expecting it to fix what's broken in you. Don't expect to find someone who'll make you feel purposeful again just by needing you. And for God's sake, if someone starts having monthly crises that require your money, get on a plane and go home. The surprising benefit of finding a Vietnamese wife in Vietnam? Learning you didn't need a wife at all. You needed to grieve properly, make actual friends, build a real life instead of a fantasy one. That lesson cost me 35,000 euros. Maybe you can learn it cheaper. That's the story. That's all of it. I'm not proud, but I'm not ashamed either. Just another Irish teacher who thought he could outrun grief and learned otherwise. Could be worse. I'm still here, still teaching, still drinking coffee that costs 30 cents and tastes like hope, even when it probably shouldn't. Declan O'Sullivan's story is one we hear variations of often here at Inside Vietnam. The details change, but the pattern remains. Loneliness, hope, gradual financial involvement, warning signs rationalized as cultural differences, and eventually the painful truth. What makes Declan's story different is his honesty about his own role in what happened. He doesn't position himself as purely a victim. He recognizes that his desperate need to feel purposeful again made him ignore obvious red flags. That Lynn was opportunistic, yes, but that he was willfully blind. The lesson here isn't that Vietnam is dangerous, or that Vietnamese women are scammers. The lesson is simpler and harder. When someone seems too interested in you for qualities you've never demonstrated, you're probably demonstrating your bank balance. When every relationship milestone comes with a price tag, that's not building a life together. That's paying for a service you're too lonely to recognize as one. Declan lost 35,500 euros over 11 months, not catastrophic, but preventable. What he gained was wisdom about his own vulnerability, resilience he didn't know he had, and eventually an honest life in a place he's learned to love for real reasons rather than fantasy ones. If you're considering a similar move, learn from Declan's expensive education. Come for the culture, the affordability, the adventure. But don't come expecting someone else to fix what's broken in you. That work is yours alone. Thanks for watching Inside Vietnam.